Greetings all, Ferrariman601 here. Welcome back to Flight Simulator 2020, and welcome to the runway here at Cairo International Airport in Cairo, Egypt. What are we doing here today? Well, we've been doing a little bit of an impromptu series in terms of trying to find landmarks around the world, in particular landmarks that are associated with motorsport. We're not going to be looking for motorsport landmarks here today, though. What we are going to be doing is finding some landmarks that are associated with, well, the nature of society itself. The pyramids in Egypt are among the oldest artificial structures still existing today, and they are the only still surviving, largely intact, ancient wonders of the world. Built about 4,500 years ago, these things were the largest structures in terms of overall height until the end of the 19th century, if you could believe it or not. So 4,000 plus years of being the tallest things that humanity has ever built. And with Flight Simulator having the overall fidelity that it does, we're able to explore these things, and well, we'll see what they actually look like, but I think that they are going to be rather impressive. So that is the plan here today. What I'm doing here, stalling for time, trying to confirm that we actually do have a proper stream going. Talk back. Checking all that out now. Make sure that we've got audio. Make sure that you can hear me. Yes, we do have audio. I can confirm all of that. Awesome. HJR says, hey, Ferrari man. I say, hey, HJR, how are ya? Right, so sitting here on the runway at Cairo, we've got a Cessna 172 here, and we're going to go find the pyramids. Let's go find them, shall we? Cold and dark here in the cockpit. We'll remedy that presently. Battery master is on. Get avionics buses up. We'll start to get some ancillary stuff. We'll get our beacon up, nav light, get our strobes up. Landing and taxi lights I'm not going to bother with. Trim is set for takeoff. Yep, indeed it is. Right, that's our avionics calibration completed. That's fine. We'll get an engine running. Right. Alternator master on, brings everything up to 28 volts. That's good. You don't heat up. I think we will be all set. Right. I'm gonna trim us outside of takeoff trim a little bit to 0. Zero all that out. And I am going to set a heading bug here for runway heading here so that we'll be able to get a vector back to Cairo once we're done with all this, because if I've done my sums correctly, the Giza complex is going to be a little bit behind us, pretty much by 180 degrees. Oh, that's flap set to 10 degrees. Get our eye point up, release parking brakes, and give me some throttle and wait for the torque. There is that torque immediately. Gyroscopic precession of the propeller. Ah, all right. Rudder authority starts to come on as the airspeed builds, as you might expect. There's 60 knots coming up. Park, rotate, and we are up. Fly runway heading out of here a little bit. And hopefully the audio is still good here in terms of you being able to hear me. I confirm that. Yes, we have got good audio. Fantastic. Alright, we drifted a little bit right of center line there on the runway, no problem. We will be executing about a 180-degree turn in a couple of seconds here. Little Cessna 172, nothing particularly special about it, pretty ubiquitous trainer aircraft. We'll just sort of clear the airfield perimeter, and then we'll do a 180 turn to the left and start to see some weird artifacts with the terrain here in terms of how all of that is calculated. That's a big ridge all around the airport associated with a vertical road. I'm gonna say that's not quite accurate, just a hunch. Right, we'll do our turnaround. That we are ascending rather steeply here, about 1,000 feet a minute. We want are the other runways at Cairo International. We'll sort of roll out here and fly downwind roughly the runway from whence we came. Hesitated eye telling me to watch out for flying buses. Well, this is Egypt. Things happen sometimes. More concerned with the ATC.
Cairo Tower Ferrariman601 heavy frequency change.
Yes, I am aware that I've appended the heavy call sign to my tail number here for a Cessna 172. Why? For the laughs. What is my setup? Trimmed out to 0 degrees and full throttle, which we're actually going to be pulling back a little bit here because we're still ascending and we're going to get into some low cloud layers, and I don't want to be doing that. Right, so if I have done my Google Earthing correctly, the Giza complex should be more or less straight out ahead of us by about 15 miles or so. And I'm pretty sure that about off 12 o'clock here, right across the nose, I'm starting to see some things that look distinctly like pyramids. Indeed we are. Yep, that be the Giza complex. 3 of those, probably the most famous structures in the world, and have been for over 4,000 years. A couple others down that way a bit that we'll take a look at as well. Since Giza is closest to us, we'll take a look there first. A little bit of left bank dialed in. We'll head outside for a moment. Just got standard weather conditions loaded up here just before 8 a.m. local time. Nice autogen scenery, nice airport terminals, gates and such. Of course, you'll start to see the city as we start to fly away from the airport. We're still kind of over the perimeter. It all looks pretty nice. There, of course, is the Nile. Was the absolute lifeblood of ancient Egypt and still very much the lifeblood of modern-day Egypt. The country's only major waterway, supply of fresh water to millions of people. Very important considering you're living in the middle of a desert. Hesitated eye, that's probably the worst pun I have ever heard, and I've heard some bad ones. Yes, most of them from you. At least you admit it. No, doing about 105 knots or so. Maintaining a reasonable rate of ascent. Trim down a little, as a matter of fact. Using trim and throttle to more or less maintain altitude. We should be over our first point of interest in another couple of minutes. Obviously, we'll fly over most of Cairo City, as it were. Stadium of some sort down there. This direction. Pretty significant development out here as well. Never actually visited this part of the world. Perhaps someday. Nice. Headed into this cloud here. Not totally ideal in a little light airplane like this, but okay. Probably going to get a little bit of turbulence. So, that is the Giza complex directly ahead. This is considered to be the only still surviving wonder of the ancient world, put together during the 4th dynasty, the Old Kingdom of Egypt. And the 3 major structures that you can see here. We have got the Great Pyramid, which is the one that looks most like a true geometric pyramid in terms of its relatively uniform from top to bottom and on all main faces of the structure. That one, according to the ancients, would have been called something along the lines of Akhet Khufu, who was built by the pharaoh Khufu. Construction from my source here says that ranged between 2580 and 2560 BC. So we are talking further BC than we currently are AD. That's old. It's really, really old. We're going to bring power to idle and start a descent here. Middle structure there. That is the Pyramid of Khafre. That one was built supposedly around the time of 2570 BC, so basically around the same time as Khufu's Great Pyramid, the official one. The one in the middle has always been my favorite, though. Distinctive from the proper Great Pyramid because it's got some remnants of the original casement stones that would have been surrounding the facades of all three of these. And we've got good reason to suspect the facades of the other surviving pyramids that are still around. And then the third and the last one to be built here, the smaller one, slightly offset a little bit to the south from position relative to the Great Pyramid. That's the Pyramid of Menkaure. That one was built in about 2510 BC, around that time there. So those are the three major structures here at the Giza complex. So we are going to switch to external cameras here. Get some instrumentation up so I don't kill us. I don't know if there's going to be any reasonable place for us to land here at Giza because the confines are kind of tight and the land is not at all level when you move away from the actual building site. There we go, that's a Great Pyramid. Do several orbits here because we are going a bit fast at the moment. And that's a Great Pyramid. See that structure on top of it, I think that actually is an aircraft warning beacon. And then Khafre's Pyramid, my favorite. You can see toward the top you do have remnants of the casement stones that most likely surrounded the entire thing around the facade. Then you've got the smaller one. Menkaure is here. We have other smaller structures around. I do like what they've done in terms of detailing these things. They are not procedurally generated auto-gen scenery. These are objects that actually have been put together with some intent here from the developers. Because it would look awfully silly if Flight Simulator decided to render the oldest and arguably some of the most important structures in the whole known history of civilization as apartment blocks, like they've done with the Washington Monument, for example. The texture work that they've done on the facades here. Of course, what you're seeing here, mostly interior stones that are there partially as structural members. Of course, the real structure of the thing is underneath, inside. They're built around basically piles of coarse aggregate stones. Of course, even those would be weighing many tons each. But what you're seeing here are more so casement stones. These would have been the foundation layer for the ultimate either limestone or granite facade bricks that would have been put across the top. And again, you can see some of that on top here. Making sure that we're going to make this turn. It would be a very, very bad day if if we were going to crash into something that's truly a priceless artifact, something that's of great value to literally everyone on Earth. I'm going to shoot the gap here between the two. Yeah, we can make it. Place that we can reasonably set this thing down and use the free camera here, take a little bit of a better look, or not sure. See, the ground is leveled out underneath the bases of the structure, as you would expect, but you get away from it and immediately you see all these undulations. Not really thinking there's any reasonable place to set this down here. But there you go, that's the Giza complex. And I'm quite sure that if you were to try to do this in reality, you would get the Egyptian Air Force out after you really, really fast. So quite obviously, one wrong move would mean absolute disaster, and not as far as you're concerned, but as far as, well, you know, 4,000 years of history is concerned. But how ridiculous would this be if you could bring back either the people who commissioned these structures or the architects who designed them or the people who actually put in the grunt work and built them, if you could bring them back to our era and explain to them that some guy on the internet, if you could explain to them what an internet was, if you could explain to them what electricity was, if you could explain to them what computer graphics were and all of that. Some guy using technology that we don't even have the means to explain to you because we're not entirely sure how you will process this information. Some guy is talking about what you did 4,000 years ago. That would make their heads explode. Makes my head explode just trying to think about how you would go about trying to explain this to somebody. But, all right. There are other things around here, though, that we can see, other pyramids. They are a little bit farther south of here. It is the Great Pyramid proper. There are your buses. Obviously, lots of tourism around here, I am quite sure. So we'll fly back out here, get a little bit of speed and altitude, and fly away from Giza. We'll head roughly south here. Where you can see that there are some more structures out there in the distance. These are obviously also pyramids, but they're a little bit different. They're a little bit older than the ones at Giza. And they actually represent a couple of, shall we say, missteps architecturally. Additionally, we have got a third back here. This one's a little bit closer than the other two. We'll go there first. So what we're coming up onto now is the Saqqara necropolis. And the structure that we're interested in is the stepped pyramid built by the king Djoser. This was built around 2650 or so BC. And this represents, we think, one of the earliest attempts at pyramid building in the Old Kingdom period. In the Old Kingdom period, basically the only time that the ancient Egyptians built pyramids of this structure and this overall type. From this point, they moved into the Middle Kingdom period, which was a time of turbulence. You had the king Akhenaten, who had tried to overhaul their whole philosophical and religious system from a polytheistic to a monotheistic system based around worshipping the sun. They hated him. Arguably, some theories say that they assassinated him. They definitely assassinated his son, Tutankhamun. And then after that, order was restored, and then Egypt went into the glorious New Kingdom period with names such as Ramses and Hatshepsut. But these structures must have been such an economic drain to build. I mean, at their time, they were the largest structures on Earth in terms of overall height and volume. And even now, to build something like this would be ridiculously difficult. And we're not just talking about the size of the finished structures or the size and weight of the component parts, but we're talking about precision like you cannot believe. The Great Pyramid over there at Giza, I believe it is an absolutely perfect square to within a few centimeters per side. And that's done 4,500 years ago by people who allegedly didn't even know what a wheel was. Yet they're achieving precision like that. The fitment of the interior stones and a lot of these things are so fine. And they don't use mortar to bind these things together. It's all done by gravity and just perfect fit. They're still so precisely done that you can't get a sheet of paper between them. You can't get a razor blade between them. It's insane what these people were able to achieve all those many thousands of years ago. However, it wasn't always perfect, and this is one of those examples. This is Djoser's stepped pyramid, and this, we think, represents one of the earliest, if not the earliest, attempts at large-scale megalithic pyramid construction by the Egyptians. Obviously, they went for sort of a ziggurat-type design, which has several advantages and several disadvantages. The advantages are it's inherently stable. It's easier to make square blocks than it is to make constantly sloping sides like a triangular pyramid shape. But the disadvantages are it's more susceptible to weathering, which of course they wouldn't have been so concerned about in their own lifetimes, but obviously you can see how these have fared in the time that has passed since. But also, it just doesn't look as good. And these guys, in addition to being fantastic designers, fantastic architects, they were also preeminently concerned with image. And that just doesn't have the image. However, it was designed by Imhotep, who was a bit of a Renaissance man 4,000 years before the Renaissance. Supposedly he was a physician and an architect and a writer of sorts. Obviously had to be a pretty smart guy if he's going to design structures like these. But generally, you can see the overall plan, similar to Menkare's pyramid over there at Giza, similar in size. But this one about 100, 120 years older. So the whole era of big-time pyramid building really didn't last all that long. as far as the Egyptians were concerned. Only about 100 years between this and Giza, so they learned a lot really quickly. Very cool. That's the step pyramid of Djoser. And now, we go a little bit farther out. We'll see that we have got two additional structures out here. These are two structures that were built both by the King Snefru. This is the one that is closer to us is called the Red Pyramid. And you'll see why it's called the Red Pyramid undoubtedly in a moment. And these two represent, I think, two attempts at the same overall plan. The Red Pyramid, the closest one to us, constructed during the 4th Dynasty. And it is a true pyramid, and it is we think, the first successful attempt at building a true pyramid in terms of sides that are sloping at a constant angle, meeting at a central convergence point at the top with a square base. We don't know if others perhaps were built before this and somehow did not survive, but that's what we've got here with the Red Pyramid. We have left the Saqqara necropolis, and we have gone to the Dashur necropolis. So these are three different sites. We have Dashur, we have got Saqqara, and we have Giza. We are going to attempt to make a landing here. You can see that we have got a road immediately ahead of us, so we are going to pass over that. Going to attempt to set it down immediately behind the road. You can see we've got a whole lot more flat ground here. All right, pass over the road. Let the ground come up to meet us. Right. Sort of flip around, and yeah, there you go. It's a pretty imposing thing. Do is start to point the airplane downhill so that we can get a little bit of gravity assistance on this takeoff. Set the parking brakes. Got the engine down. I'm sure we're going to get, yep, warning here in a moment telling me, hey, your flight's over. No, it's not. Now what we're able to do is we're able to use our showcase camera and take a little bit more of a freeform look around this. Get some more reasonable speeds going so it doesn't take us, well, 4,000 years to walk around this thing. But there you go, Snefru's Red Pyramid. And again, we think this represents the first successful attempt by the Egyptians at building a true pyramid because, well, as you can see, we've got these constantly sloping sides. They've got a good angle all the way up and down. Looks like the top section has started to collapse a little bit, but could you hardly blame them? We are talking about 4,500 years. It's pretty remarkable that there's anything left at all, never mind something that is this good. Let's see. Yeah, looks like we have more or less just a replication of the textures on all four faces. And you can see that we have a little bit of a concave structure here along the middle face of this, but all in all, not too bad. And how's that for a view? Yeah. And just so you get a sense of scale here, we're on top here, about, I don't know, 400 or so feet up. We zoom in, there's the airplane, totally zoomed in here, and it still looks pretty tiny. So this is a big thing. Could we land on the pyramid? No. No. We can morph inside of it, though. You can see that it is a 3D model that they've put together. You can see the perimeter of it here anyway. And our airplane, where is it? There we go. That's a shot right there, isn't it? Cessna 172 out in front of the red pyramid. Yeah, that's shot. I like that. I like that immensely. We've got more to see, though. This thing out there. What is it? Well, it's another pyramid. This is a little bit more of an interesting one, though. So we zoom in on it. Looks rather different from all the others that we have seen so far. And why is this? This is the bent pyramid. And why is it called the bent pyramid? Well, quite obviously, it's bent. Why is it bent? Was that done intentionally? Well, initially, no. However, in order to salvage the structure, they decided that initially the angle that they had started up at is a little bit too steep, and you can see evidence of this by the partially collapsed side there. But this was one of their first attempts here at building a structure like this, and obviously they got a little bit wrong. The angles coming up from the ground are a bit too steep, and then they realized, uh-oh, this thing's going to collapse under its own weight, so we will shallow that angle out so we can make it up to the top anyway. Looks kind of ugly. You can see it's partially collapsed, but still standing today and still rather recognizable. This one, also built by Snefru, this was built around 2600 BC. So again, another 4th dynasty structure. Take a closer look at it. Right, so we're facing downhill. Get me all the flaps we can get. Release the brakes. That's just an avionics calibration horn. Don't worry about that. Right, we're up. And again, this is another Imhotep design. At least I think it was. And they got it a little bit wrong, as you can see. And they even managed to model some rubble around the base. You can see, though, rather large extent of the casement stones that would have been around the facade. A lot of those still existing. You get a sense of what the overall texture of the thing would have been. And again, this is a structure that they messed up on, and it's still standing. So even when the ancient Egyptians got it wrong, they still built these things to last. I mean, there would have been no reason for them to continue work on this structure once they realized that the initial angle they picked was wrong. But they did want to complete it. And they completed it, obviously, to a standard well enough that it has survived, well, 4,500 years, with the mistake still intact. So how about that? We're going to put this thing down right about here. We'll flip back around. Get a little bit closer. You have to be careful not to take the propeller off over some of these steeper rises. Not going to try to get up that last little ridge. Wrong way, come on. All right. Then we just ground the hell out of our starter. Don't do that. It always thinks I want to end the flight when I turn off the avionics there. Really just trying to keep our battery from running down. But there we are. Cessna in front of the bent pyramid. Okay. That would be a national. That'd be a National Geographic cover if ever I saw one. But just like we had with the red pyramid, you can see what's going on here. Very intricate geometry that they've managed to create here. Obviously, we're talking about a partially collapsed structure, but they have bothered to model all of this quite well. And considering what it is, obviously it's just one blanket texture put over the whole thing for the most part, but the geometries are good. Like, real good. And you can see just how big the casement stones would have been. It's a good, I don't know, it's really hard to get a sense of scale here, but that's a good at least 20, 30 feet thick. It's insane. Along the base. Yep. How wild is this? Up at the top. Yep. There you go. That's a view. Nice. That's about as far away as we'll get from Giza. And you'll see what we've got here if we zoom. There's Giza all the way out there. So quite some distance. Obviously, if you look at the overall location of where we are, you can see where the Nile is. Yeah, there's the river. If you zoom out, you can see where we've got to be. So the thinking is that they took these stones from places farther south along the Nile, and then they loaded them up on barges, and they brought them up the river, and then they brought them here to where obviously they were erected. Now, there's a lot of speculation in terms of how exactly they did that. Did they actually float them on barges? Did they, once they got them off the boats, how did they transport them over land? Did they use rollers? Did they drag them? Did they dig temporary canals? All of the above are possible. We know that the Egyptians were very good irrigators and cultivators, so canals would have been something known to them because we know that they used them for agriculture. Did they use them for transport? It's a good chance that they did. We don't think that they knew about wheels because we don't really see too many drawings of wheels in the Old Kingdom, murals anyway, than the Middle and New Kingdom ones. Yes, we do, because we know that they rode chariots into battle. But did they know about them in the Old Kingdom? Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. They don't think that they did. But regardless, these blocks would have been weighing 20, 30, 40 tons each. So if you're going to transport them by a means other than water, you'd better have some pretty well-oiled machinery to do it. And by that, we mean a lot of manpower. There is a common conception out there that the pyramids were built by slaves. That's most likely not true, only because there's an association with pyramid construction and the Hebrews for some reason. However, the pyramid construction, as we've been talking about, happened a good 1,500 or so years before the proposed date of the Exodus. And we know from biblical accounts that the Hebrews were in Egypt for about 430 years or so, which means that there is no way that the Hebrews were in Egypt at the time the pyramids being constructed. So we know that's not true. Were they built by slaves from other places? It's a possibility. Is it likely, though? In my mind, no. Only because, what was the purpose of these structures? They were built to be mortuary temples for the kings, who, according to their mythology and their religion, their kings were literal incarnations of the gods. So are you really going to have unskilled slave labor building a mortuary temple for a god? No, you're really not. You're going to have your best and brightest working on these from beginning to end. And remember, you're not going to invest all of that into slave labor per se, because the whole point of slavery is it's unjust and it's unfair and it's cheap. So that's why they would do that. If you were going to invest all that time to educate slaves, they wouldn't be slaves anymore, would they? They would be indentured servants at worst, because now they're valuable to you, because they have skills, real skills. So I don't think it was slaves that built these. I think that obviously the people who designed them would have been royal elites, but more so the people who worked on these in terms of the actual grunt work. I think it was probably a great honor to be asked to work on a pyramid because, again, it's a mortuary temple for a god on earth. So I would say that the whole narrative of slaves building the pyramids most likely is not accurate. In any regard, that's the bent pyramid. There's one other that is around here, but not quite sure if it's actually here in the sim. But there's one other structure called the Black Pyramid. And that, we're not entirely sure what it was supposed to have been. We know it was a pyramid structure at one time, but we're not sure if they ever completed it, nor are we sure for how long it survived if they did complete it, because, as we see it today, it's an entirely collapsed ruin. And whether or not it was ever actually brought to completion, we don't know. But it is out here, or at least what I think a representation of it is out here. We'll take a look at it. Now, we see these two mounds out there in the distance. Obviously, they stand out from the rest of the landscape So we can make a reasonable assumption to say that these are artificial structures of some kind. But as we get closer to them, they don't really have any particular definition or any real definite shape other than their mounds. Are they Flight Simulator's representation of ruined pyramids? They could be. They could also be associated with other much more recent mining or refining operations. I don't know. But there is a ruin called the Black Pyramid, and you can go look it up. And basically the only thing that survives of it today is a big pile of rubble, and then in the center of that are a bunch of core stones that are roughly cuboid in their appearance. But we are pretty sure that this was once a true pyramid, but it's unclear as to whether or not it was ever completed, or whether or not it had collapsed during construction. But it's out there. And I think we could be looking at Flight Simulator's best representation of it right here. Judging on the relative location of this versus the rest of the pyramids here, could be associated with them. Not sure. Or again, it could just be a random pile of dirt and desert. I don't know. All I know is that this does not at all blend in with the surrounding landscape. So it's an artificial structure of some kind. But the sim is not rendering this or its neighbor over there a little bit with any real fidelity to determine what it exactly is. As far as anything else out here, it doesn't seem to be anything close by. Not really seeing anything else of note in this area. So what we're going to do is start to head back toward Cairo. There's the bent pyramid and a red pyramid behind our flare shield right now. There we go. And again, even in the modern day, you can see that these appear to be canals. So they have been used in the construction here. Quite possible. At least for the Nashur necropolis, probably for the Saqqara one as well. And for Giza, well, I don't know. By the time, obviously, they got to the Giza stage, they knew what they were doing. So that must have included the means of transport and everything else. over here with the rocky outcroppings there, I think that's part, anyway, of the Valley of the Kings, which was another necropolis that was a Middle to New Kingdom idea. And even up until the Roman occupation, the Valley of the Kings was being used for royal burials. So we're talking right at the turn of BC to AD there. The Giza complex looking resplendent as ever. Very cool. Any other interesting things we can see on the way back to Cairo. Again, it's just a sinking suspicion on my part, but I think the Sphinx is also right there at Giza. Pretty sure that we're looking at it coming into the arc of the propeller here. That might be something to take a look at. We think the Sphinx is a representation, at least in terms of the facial likeness, of Khafre, which may make sense considering it's located directly in front of Khafre's pyramid. Most likely built at around 25, 40-ish BC, in that era there. Now, could you imagine living in one of these houses? You look out of your window every morning and you see, you know, that. That would be quite the thing. I would never tire of seeing that. Yep, that's a Sphinx, all right. Looks a whole lot smaller than it does in pictures. Cool. Real cool. let's not crash into a pyramid. That would be bad, as we have already discussed. Could you imagine being able to go back in time and fly an airplane around these things as they were being built? Or as they looked in their heyday? Could you imagine the panic that you would incite among several million ancient Egyptians? What's that thing? And what is it doing? Yes, and yeah, the other point about Egypt is in terms of what it's been through since these days. I think it's very telling that Egypt's best times happened so very long ago. I mean, we are talking remote past this. I mean, the structures that we're looking at here, yes, they're very impressive, but they're all over 4,000 years old. And they represent the zenith of, basically, they represent the architectural zenith of Western civilization. There's no way around it. Yes, we've built things since that are much bigger, much stronger, much more capable structures, but these are still here. Will anything that we've built today survive for 4,000 years? Probably not. That is the Sphinx. But in terms of what Egypt has been through since these days, I mean, Egypt has been dealing with European occupation since antiquity. Initially, you got the Hellenization period, and then you got the Roman occupation, which really sealed the deal for Egypt as an independent state. Julius Caesar, he leads the campaign to invade Egypt around 50-ish BC, and then that leads to the whole Cleopatra saga. And ultimately, Egypt becomes a protector of the Romans. And that remains until basically the fall of Rome in about 476 or so. Then Egypt falls into Dark Ages, much like the rest of the Mediterranean. Without the stabilizing influence of Rome there, it was kind of every man for himself. About 150 or so years after the fall of Rome, you then have the Islamic conquests, which begin in Arabia, and then they very quickly envelop most of the known world as far as they were concerned. So the Islamic forces come into Egypt, and they, what was left of the culture here was assimilated into an Islamic culture, with a few exceptions. Obviously, after the Roman occupation, eventually Rome becomes a Christian state. They Christianize all the kingdoms, as it were. So Egypt becomes Christian, later evolving into Coptic, and then ultimately it becomes Islamic. We see that today. However, you do see remnants of Coptic Christians is still in Egypt, and now there's a rather significant Coptic diaspora all around the world. And I think really that's portrayed very nicely by the languages that exist in this part of the world. Ancient Egyptian was spoken for 4,000 years. That's in some form or another. You had Old Kingdom Egypt, which we're looking at Old Kingdom structures there in the pyramids. So call it 2500 BC, 3000 BC, another 500 years in the past, right? Their language is the same, similar anyway, definitely related, from the time of the pyramids being built all the way up to AD, right? Obviously it evolved naturally, but the written standard stayed the same in terms of hieroglyphic writing. That was only a standard that was ever to be used in religious observances and super formal observances anyway. Later on, with the Greek influence, you start to get Demotic script, which was a more common writing form, but it's still ancient Egyptian. Today, it still exists in the form of Coptic. But how many people speak Coptic nowadays? Not many. And the number dwindles every day. So the language of the proudest civilization ever to exist in the history of the world, completely erased, more or less, by the time the 700s AD come around in the Islamic conquest. So that's, I think, as good an illustration as any of what Egypt has had done to it since the era of the ancient empire. You've had all sorts of other powers come in. You've had marauders come in. You've had invaders come in. And all of that's well before we start talking about the British Empire in the 18th and 19th century. I asked Cairo for landing permission.
Cairo Tower F-Man601 Heavy is 12 miles southwest with Sierra to land.
F-Man601 Heavy.
5 center.
Fly straight in runway 5 center. Altimeter 29er decimal 9er to wind 267 at 7.
Fly straight in runway 5 center F-Man601 Heavy.
Center. Be fine. And I've got the runway in sight. Neutral or trim out and landing. Not that it mattered when we were landing out in the field. Well, Forza 2992 is just the standard temperature and pressure setting for altimeter, assuming standard conditions at sea level. Most of the time, it's never a standard atmosphere. So I would imagine 2992 is going to be pretty rare. Should be getting a clearance for landing at any moment now. About 4,000 feet or so. Of course, we're well above sea level here. Real helpful if that cloud would move so we can see where our runway is. So I'm looking at 5 right at the moment. 5 center. There we go. I can see it again. There we go. There we go.
Heavy cleared to land runway 5 center. Wind 267
267 at 7, so we might get a bit of a tailwind here. Be okay. You got a little airfield there as well. It's actually a military strip. But this is the big international airport. I think this is an 11,000 foot runway or so. And you can see some great separation between all three of the main runways here, so big jumbos can come in here, no problem. A little bit of turbulence. Some thermals coming off of the highway, I'm sure. I'm aware that we are quite a bit high, but that's fine. Alright, we are into the airfield perimeter. That's well and good. Coming in, yeah, a little bit of a tailwind. It'd be a little bit long, I think. There it is. Roll it out a little bit.
601 heavy exit runway when able.
Not quite able yet, folks. Will be in a moment. Right. We'll turn it off. There we go.
FMAN601 heavy contact ground on 120.4.
Going to 120.4 FMAN601 heavy.
We're not going to taxi to parking. We are just going to bring us to a stop right about here. Go. Parking brake set. It's all good. Engine stop. Yeah. Avionics master off. Battery master off. Actually, real quick, how much fuel did we burn? Yeah, fuel quantity there. Just about 9 gallons or so per tank. All right. Not bad. We took off with about 15 per tank, of course. But that is about it. We took a look at some of the wonders of the ancient world, the only ones that are still in existence in the present day, the pyramids, particularly the ones at Giza. But most interesting to me is to see the ones that didn't quite work. The step pyramid, it's ugly, but structurally it works. And then the bent pyramid, which is real ugly, but it's ugly because structurally it didn't work. So that's cool. I like that. And of course, the ones at Giza plus the Sphinx, those are the ones that get all of the attention to this day. And rightly so, because, well, they're fantastic. But there you go. It is possible to use Flight Simulator to do a little bit of very rudimentary archaeology. And if you know a little bit about the history of what's going on, you can actually have a rather entertaining time of it. So that's my contribution to YouTube Academics today. We talked a little bit about ancient Egypt, and we took a look at Flight Simulator's interpretation of some of their most glorious monuments. So that's it for me today. I do thank you all very much for watching. Ferrariman601 saying thank you very much, and of course, we will see you soon.